All right, and this is Dog Days of Podcasting Day number whatever it is. And today we have the one and only Rysa Walker, who is a repeat from last year. How are you doing tonight, Rysa?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
I'm doing well myself. And for people wondering, she's using a still picture because it's way too hot up in her attic.
Writing cave, yes. There's inadequate ventilation up here, and believe me, you don't want to see me right now. And also, a video, more to the point, a video up here tends to be a little erratic. It tends to jump. So if I move my hands, it looks like somebody is doing slow motion, stop action, claymation kind of thing. So, and I can't talk without moving my hands.
Okay. Well, being a professor, that I guess that probably comes from being a professor in a previous life.
Yes.
So, last time we talked, you were getting ready to release the third book of the Chronos series. How did that wind up going for you?
Oh, it's gone really well. I've been really happy with the way that the response to the final book in the series. I mean, always when you're trying to wrap up a trilogy, especially if you've got any sort of a romantic triangle going on, there are going to be a few people who aren't necessarily happy with the way it turned out. But I think most people were pretty pleased with the ending, and felt that I landed the ship somewhat successfully. At any rate, I didn't crash it, so I'm happy with that.
Well, so it's good. And for those who don't know, after our chat last year, I did wind up coming out with my own Kindle Worlds novella, which has put a little bit of extra change in both Rice and my pockets.
Yeah, Kindle Worlds is great. I love the fact that it makes it so that people can write what is essentially fan fiction within a universe that they like, and can still make a little bit of money off of it. It's not going to make anybody it's not going to pay the mortgage, but it might pay for a dinner out, and that's always kind of nice.
Yep, it certainly is, at least until you get to the point where you're only selling 8 copies a month, and then it's like, time to
Yeah,
come out with a new book.
nothing lasts forever. I mean, that's the thing. Any author goes through that because, I mean, I'll be at the point where I like to look at my numbers when they're high, but when they start dipping down, 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 as inevitably they do, then you start, kind of avoiding the ranks, and you don't want to look at where you are in the system. It's nothing stays up permanently. It's gravity's going to pull it down eventually. The good thing is, though, when there's any kind of promotion going on for the books in my series, generally the Kindle Worlds bump up a little bit too, and that's always a good thing.
Yep, it certainly is. But of course, this year you're here to talk about your brand new book, which I've actually caught you before it came out, called The Delphi Effect. And can you give us a brief synopsis of what it's about?
Well, like most authors, I have an elevator pitch, and I've been saying for the past year, when people would ask what it was about, that it was basically X-Files meets X-Men with a little dash of The Men Who Stare at Goats, George Clooney's movie, thrown in, because that was based on a real government program that existed for a number of years, in which, building off CIA, MK Ultras, the CIA's MK Ultra program, that used some drugs to enhance mental abilities. Particularly, they were hoping to enhance psychic abilities. So it's building off of a real program that the government ran for a number of years. And I'm looking at the after effects on the next generation, the offspring of people who were involved in the program.
Okay. So,
Hypothetical impact, I should stress. Real government program, I have no clue if there's anything going on with the offspring of people in that program, but it gave me a good starting point for this book.
okay. And, but of course, these people can't jump through time. They just see things in other places, or.
Well, it's a combination of effects. The just as MK Ultra and the military variant of that program were attempting to increase the ability for what they called remote viewing, which was basically just psychic viewing or being clairvoyance, being able to see things at a distance. I have a number of different abilities that these offspring have picked up, assuming that they were actually experimenting to try several different enhancers. The primary character in the series is Anna, who, since she was small, has had the unfortunate ability to pick up mental hitchhikers, dead mental hitchhikers. So she doesn't have a clue why this happened until later in the book, but and she really doesn't have any idea why they're interested in her. And I'm not going to spoil that, but there's a very good reason that somebody might be interested in a person with the mental ability to speak to ghosts, shall we say.
Okay. And I know the two series aren't related, but out of curiosity, was that by the time the Chronos gene had came about, would this be a possible gene therapy also then?
It's kind of an accidental gene therapy in this case. There are definitely drugs that people take that have genetic effects on their offspring for several generations. There are also drugs that can be taken that actually alter your own gene structure after you take them. So that's in the case of the Chronos gene, that was done on purpose. They tampered with the embryos basically to make sure that they got the effects they wanted. In this case, it was an accidental effect of a drug program that the government did.
Right, yeah. I was just asking if, in your Chronos world, if you could have chosen to had that effect instead of the Chronos gene.
I suppose you could have. I suppose you could have chosen to have that that amped up. But I mean, these two worlds are very separate. But if you're going on that that hypothesis that that this is something that could be amped up, then it's certainly something that the folks would have been able to do in the 24th century. So.
Okay. So, I know last we chatted, you hadn't heard from the Kindle Worlds department yet. Has that changed, or?
No, and I doubt it's probably going to be a little while. That's one of those things. I want to see how the book does. I didn't hear anything from for Chronos until I think Kindle World for Chronos came out right around the time the second book in the Chronos Files.
Oh, okay.
Edge. So my guess is it'll probably be a little while. I'm definitely open to it if the folks at Kindle World are interested, but they haven't approached me about it yet. So they're probably waiting to see how this book does.
Okay. Alrighty. Yeah, I'm sure that lots of budding authors out there are waiting to be able to sink their teeth into a new series from you. So, how did you, or well, actually, you already answered that. What changes did you do with how the drugs affect the Delphi effect from what's actually recorded in history, or would that be giving too much away?
Well, one problem with that is everything that was done under MK Ultra. I mean, a lot of that has been released, but anything that would have been done since then with the program. My hypothesis was basically they closed down all of the psychic programs within the military in 1995. The CIA did an investigation into this group that was operating out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, actually not that far from where I live, and said that there was basically no evidence that there was anything useful going on. And my view is, being a little bit of a conspiracy theory fan, if you really had something going on, if there were measurable effects within a program, what would you probably do? You'd probably say, nothing is happening. We're going to close this down, and you pull it into the CIA. So that's kind of the argument that I'm going on, is that they had found a serum that enhanced the psychic effects. And so they pulled the program over into the CIA, but it destabilized the individuals. So eventually they do have to close it down. But it's the offspring that are more stable. And in that sense, that is somewhat similar to the Chronos gene, because you had the actual historians were unable to use it, but those who inherited the ability were still able to travel through time. So a little bit of a parallel there.
Okay.
But in terms of the psychic abilities, we've got quite a lot of stuff going on. In addition to being able to pick up ghosts, we've got a guy who's got, well, Anna teases him and calls it Spidey sense. He has the sense when somebody's about to go medieval, if they are having violent impulses, it triggers his ability. And there are several others who, I don't want to spoil things too much, but we have a Kid in Room 81. I've got a book trailer going to be coming out fairly soon with a little glimpse of what the Kid in Room 81 can do. And let's just say that some of the stuff that, if you're a Stephen King fan, if you've ever read Firestarter and some of those books that he did, and the more science fiction, paranormal variety than the strictly horror, there are some a little bit of homage to Firestarter and Carrie.
Okay. Well, that definitely. I'm now getting feedback from you.
Really? Okay, because I haven't changed anything.
Okay, there it goes. It disappeared now.
Okay.
All the odd little quirks of the internet.
Yes.
So, do you also see this as being a trilogy if it does well enough, or?
Yes, actually, it is. It's already set as a trilogy. Skyscape opted for the entire trilogy instead of just one book at a time. So the Delphi Deception will come out in October of 2017, and the Delphi Legacy, which is the final book in the trilogy, will come out in October of 2018. So that's already kind of set in motion. And still toying with the idea of whether there will be novellas in between the books, as there were with the Chronos series. I think it's quite likely that there will be at least one, because I've already got one character that is kind of yanking at my brain, indicating that she wants her own story, and it will tell a part of the story that I can't really tell in first person. So I'm inclined to let her have her say.
Okay. Well, it does look like we now have 2 viewers. I'm not sure if that's just you and me, or if that's someone else actually watching. But hello, if you're out there. So with this one, are you? Well, you've also been releasing Chronos comic books. How's that been going?
Yes, that has been a fascinating process. They approached me from Jet City Comics, well, initially a couple of years ago, but then we finally got our schedules lined up this past year, and have been really fortunate in terms of the team that was put together. Paul Morrissey, who's the editor over at Jet City Comics, Heather Newfer, who helped me take the story that I wrote and kind of tweak it into comic book shape, because I'd never written a comic book, so it needed some massaging. And then in terms of our artist, Augustin Padilla, oh my goodness, I've been so impressed with his artwork. We get the ink, and I've been able to just kind of give him a general idea. I set up a Pinterest board that had some of the images of the historical locations where the new character in the comics would jump. And he's just taken the ball and run with it. And it's been fascinating to watch as the story develops visually. So that's yeah, that's been fun. We've got
Okay.
the first one came out. Let's see, July, I think it's like July 21st. We've got another one that in 2 days, actually, the second issue will will go live, and then a third issue in September, a fourth in October, and then they'll collect the whole shebang together in a graphic novel that will come out in November.
Okay. So is this a retelling of the books, or is this like a separate novella,
This
or?
is an original story. Those who have read, I won't say too much though, because there's a little bit of spoiler in there for those who haven't read the final book in the Cronus Files, Times Divide. But there is a character who is with child at the end, and that child is the one that we see in the comic books. It's she's grown now and off to art school in Chicago, and runs into somebody who, let's say, just kind of throws a kink in her life, and she ends up doing some inadvertent time traveling, and gets to visit a variety of places. There's a brief trip back to the World's Fair that Kate visits in Time Bound, and also ahead to 2092, which is a short story, a Cromer short story that I've written, and the year that Catherine famously never would explain what happened to Kate. So if you've wondered what happened in 2092 and haven't read the short story, that's revealed in the last couple of comic books. And Al Capone's trial is in there too. So got little nuggets, Civil War, little nuggets of real history that are tossed into the mix.
Okay. And at this point, would you be open if they wanted to turn the uh, Chronos novels into a graphic novel?
There's actually something. It's not quite a graphic novel, but and I will, since it's coming up, I'll go ahead and sort of unofficially announce it here, because they have announced. I couldn't say anything for a while because they hadn't announced the Kindle in Motion program yet. That was still under wraps, but there are a couple of Kindle in Motion books out now, and I don't know if you've seen those, but there are some that are illustrated and some that are like little bits of video that are put in there. I'm trying to think of which author it is. I saw one the other day. One of the romance authors with Montlake Romance. The first scene is in a forest, and so when you click on that page, it shows kind of an overview of the trees and the forest moving along as though you're kind of flying down into the forest. So it's animation within the Kindle books, and they've been working on a version of Time Bound that is not photo animation, but is actually an artist by the name of Alice Duke, whose work I love. She has been working on an illustrated, partially animated version of Time Bound. So I'm not sure yet when that's going to be released, but it is coming. And I get to see little sneak peeks. They'll send me these little moving animations where, you know, Kate's in one spot and then suddenly she's in the new location, or Daphne the dog is laying on the porch and the tail's wagging back and forth. So they just one of them that's animated that just came out is The Secret Garden. So that's any fans of that book. I know a lot of young adult readers can remember reading that as kids, they have an illustrated version of that has recently come out. So that's kind of cool.
Okay, well that's certainly cool. Any idea yet to when those will come out?
I do not know when that will be released. I know we're working on the last of the artwork. It's a little tricky because unlike a new story that is being written, and with a comic book, you've got the speech bubble there, and you've got the picture. In this case, you've got the book, and you've got the description of the scene next to your image. So that's kind of complicated because you get a picture back and the dress isn't exactly what was described in the book. So you have to go, no, then you're going to have to change the neckline. It says it's a square neck. So I have been I've been very happy with the artist, but I've felt very sympathetic toward her because I keep having to come back and go, no, that's not quite what it says. So, because sometimes that description of the picture might be on page 50 and the description was, 4 pages back or whatever. So it's a complicated process.
Right. And then it probably also helps if the person doing the drawing is familiar with what dresses look like at like the 20s or whatever.
Exactly. But always you've got to, and we have a Pinterest board, and there's been the editor who's working on this at Amazon has been wonderful in terms of, she'll come up with pictures and say, do you think this is what it would look like? And we tweak it a little bit and send it out. But there's always just a slight difference or whatever. And or it'll be a character that has been described as, having brown eyes and they've got green eyes. And it's like, no, on page 2, it said they had brown eyes. So it's a lot of it is the only way to be sure that it's right is to pick the author's brain. And so we've had to do a lot of that. Fortunately, in an era of digital art, it's a lot easier to make the character's eyes brown than it was back when, they're like, fine, I have to redo this entire thing. So.
Right. Yep, that is definitely true. For those who are watching live, if you do have any questions for Rysa, do feel free to post them up on Facebook, as I don't seem to be able to get to the questions here on Google Hangouts.
Uh-oh.
That way I can...
let me go ahead and announce. I had posted that that I would... I've got 3... advanced review copies of the Delphi Effect. So if anybody has any questions, post them in that thread on Facebook. I think I've got actually 2 threads on Facebook, but post them either on my personal page or on the Timebound page, and I will pick 3 people at random and get that signed advanced review copy to you.
All right.
Yeah, it's the Google Hangout curse. I was on a Hangout with like 4 or 5 YA authors, and nothing went right. And it's difficult to get the viewers in and get the audio exactly how it needs to be. It seems like if one little tiny thing is off, it goes haywire. You say I should have warned you about my Google curse before we came on here, right? I did, kind of. I said that live events were iffy, but...
Yeah, well, that's always the case when you try anything new.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So at this point, I remember last year, if you don't mind talking about, if you don't want to discuss this, that's totally fine. But I remember last year when we talked, you said you hadn't yet made back your initial bonus for the Chronos. Did we buy enough copies?
No, I think now it might have been times to buy might not have yet, but yeah, that no problem with that. No problem. It might be a little trickier for Delphi because after once you do okay on the first series, the bonus goes up a little bit. but or not the bonus, but oh, my brain is so totally not working today. The advance. Um,
Right.
but yes, I'm fine. I'm actually getting royalty checks now, so the sales have actually been quite good. They did uh, something that was a little bit of an experiment over the Memorial Day weekend. They offered copies of Time Bound for free as part of a promotion to Prime members. And they were able to get like 3 books for free. And it really, really boosted the series for about a month. And that was nice because after a while, I mean, when you write the final book and a lot of people have read it, it starts going down a little bit until you can actually pull in some new readers. And I think that pulled in a lot of new readers that hopefully aren't just, Doctor Who fans. Hopefully they are sci-fi and fantasy fans in general, and they'll follow me over to Delphi in addition to reading Chronos. But and the initial reviews we've had Delphi Effect at NetGalley for a couple of weeks, and so we've gotten some early reviews in on Goodreads, and it looks like people are enjoying the book. It's also been selected as a junior library guild selection for high school libraries in for the fall of 2016, which is cool because I get to have one of those little gold labels on the cover on that edition, and that's a big honor. I remember seeing those in libraries before, and I'm happy to know that one of my books made their list.
Well, that is always a good thing.
Yes, as somebody who, when I was a kid, most of my books were from the library, and that our library was woefully underfunded, and it meant that I had to kind of tussle with the librarian who kept wanting to push me back into the kids section, and I'm like, no, I've already read all of those and they're boring. So I would head back over to the sci-fi section and the horror section and grab stuff that I probably wasn't supposed to be reading, but they finally left me alone and just let me read it. So but yeah, I'm
Um,
always a big supporter of libraries because I speak frequently around here at libraries because they are perpetually underfunded pretty much everywhere.
right. Looking at your page on Facebook, I see some people. It looks like some people got print copies of the comics. Was that just a special run, or?
No, it is a print. It's both print and Kindle. It's in comic book stores and some comic book stores. I don't know if they carry Jet City Comics. It's there. So yeah, there's we have the first one came out, like I said, in July, and then I've gotten a few advanced copies of the second one. So I usually go onto Facebook and offer the first 5 people who post get an advance copy of whatever the latest release is.
Yeah, I remember. I just dropped my cordless phone. Um, I I remember this when he did the second one. I saw the announcement about 5 minutes after you had closed it.
Yeah, that happens a lot. But the good news is I'll have it again for the third one, and I'll probably do another ARC advanced review copy for Delphi as well. But yeah, they usually send me like 20, 25 copies, author copies, and after I send one to my mom and other family members, it's the ones that I've got left then that I can get out to as giveaways. So
Okay, well that's cool. Um, so was that hard to? So the company who's doing the comic book, is that also a subsidiary of Amazon,
yeah,
or?
I've been very, very lucky in that Amazon is a big amorphous Amazon in general, but Amazon Publishing is a big amorphous being. And when the Chronos File series did well, as a book series. That's when Kindle Worlds then approached me about doing the Kindle World, and then eventually Jet City Comics approached me, and Kindle in Motion approached me. So it's been nice to be able to branch out within that series and do new things that kind of keep that series alive, even as I'm moving over to Delphi, because I wrote the first, I guess, like 5 or 6 chapters of the Delphi Effect right after I wrote Time Bound. And then I entered Time Bound in the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award. And after it won the competition, they wanted the sequel. So the Delphi Effect kind of got shoved into a, mental file cabinet and literal file cabinet. And I wasn't able to get back to it until this past year when I finished up the Chronos series. So, and unfortunately, my brain was fairly tangled after finishing the Chronos series because of all the time travel. So I think the characters in Delphi Effect felt like they were getting a deficient product when I finally came back around to it, because it took me a while to get back into the story. I even had to write a Simon novella to get, Simon's one of the characters from the Chronos file. I had to write an extra novella that I'd never planned on writing simply because he wouldn't shut up. So I got him out of my head, and then I was able to move back to Delphi. And once that happened, it's rolling along rather nicely. I never know what's going to happen in my books until I'm actually writing them, though. I'm at the stage with the Delphi Deception, which is the second book in the trilogy, where it's like, okay, I've got all my characters assembled. Guys, go figure out what you're going to do. And I just sit back and see what happens. So.
Okay. So for the budding artists or the budding authors at this point, would you recommend that they try going the self-published route like you did originally, or would you suggest they try going through Amazon or some other publisher?
Well, a lot of that depends on whether or not you land an agent. And a lot depends on what you want. If you want to get your book out there and you don't want to waste a year of your life, or I won't say waste, because I guess if you actually do get an agent and all that stuff, it's not really wasted. But if you don't want to expend a year of your life waiting, then that, going the traditional route might be best for you. Also, if you're really intent on seeing your book on bookshelves in Barnes and Noble, my Time Bound is in some Barnes and Noble, but it's not carried in all of them by any means, or other bookstores. So if that kind of thing is important to you, and if you're, thin-skinned about people who go, oh, you're not a real author, you're self-published, you're not a real author. If that bothers you, then yeah, you probably don't want to go the self-published route. But if you've got stories that you want to write, you want to get them out there, and, also if you've got marketing sense, if you understand a little bit about marketing, if you don't, and you aren't willing to invest the time and the money that it can take to market a book, it may be very difficult for your books to get out as self-published. So, there's a lot of factors. I don't have any professional marketing experience, but I was in real estate for a little while. I learned how to market that way, and had a couple of other jobs that kind of played into marketing online. And so when I initially self-published, I was able to get what was Times Twisted Arrow back then. Eventually it became Time Bound, in front of readers. If you don't have any marketing abilities, if you can't, put together a graphic on Photoshop that you can post on Facebook or whatever, it may cost you money, because you may need to hire somebody to help you package your books in order to have something out there that somebody will actually click on and buy. But I know a lot of people who, you can make more money if you hit it right. You can make a lot more money self-published, because you're getting 70%, as opposed to getting, 35% if you're lucky and you have a publisher like mine, or 12, 15% on ebooks if you've got a traditional publisher. So I'm lucky. I've got the best of both worlds. Some of my stuff is self-published. Some of my stuff is published by Skyscape. So the fact that they give me that flexibility and allow me to have the novellas that are self-published, that's one of the things that I really love about working with them, and why I did not even think about marketing this series to a different publisher. I've been too happy with Skyscape. So
Okay. With Skyscape, is Amazon like the only ebook company you can, or only ebook distributor you can have, or are
yes,
you able to take it wide?
it's Kindle only. It's not on Nook. Now, that doesn't mean that you only read it on a Kindle. You can read it on an iPad as long as you have, the Kindle viewer. But I was already Kindle only. I had shifted over because when I was self-published, because I was selling one or two copies on Barnes and Noble, and that was it. And it made a lot more sense for me to go into the Amazon lending library, where I would get some money when somebody actually borrowed the book. I was making more off borrows than I was making selling off, Nook, Kobo, Smashwords, all of those. So I had already shifted over even before. It was kind of a no-brainer for me.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard some people, especially if they're like international authors, they promote Kobo over uh, Amazon, but that's mainly because Kobo has a bigger footprint in their country than
Yeah, and
Amazon does.
country. I mean, I have time bound. I mean, I've got international translations of some of the Chronos Files books. Time bound is currently with some traditional publishers, and that in that case, the ebooks are available in other formats. But it has also been picked up by Amazon Crossing, which does translations into a number of different languages. So it's in German, it's in French, and it's in Spanish through Amazon Crossing, and they have the Kindle lending library and Kindle Unlimited in some of those countries. So in that case, again, I still think I'm better off being Kindle only, because I'm getting those borrows. And indie authors know this. A lot of times your borrows through Kindle Unlimited, your borrows through the Kindle Online Library, and through Kindle Unlimited, when people grab the book, that can equal more than what you make through your sales in a lot of cases. I know a lot of indie authors who actually make more on the borrows. So for me, would it be nice if those readers who own a Nook and that's all they have could get my books? Yes, obviously that would be nice. And if they contact me quite often, I will find a way to get a copy to them. I'll get them a PDF copy or whatever they need. But it's also an audiobook, and I've been overjoyed with my narrator, Kate Rudd. And she will also be narrating the Delphi trilogy. I'm very, very happy to say. And so people who can't get my books through Kindle, they can get them through Audible. And they're getting a very good version through Audible because, like I said, Kate Rudd does an incredible job.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. Is she going to be doing a different voice so that we don't hear?
So you don't hear Kate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure the voice will be somewhat different. I haven't heard this, but I've heard enough of her books that that I'm confident that. I'm listening to one of her series right now. I'm a huge fan. So if Kate Rudd reads it, it will probably end up on my iPhone, and I'll be listening to it when I'm driving. And they had initially, and maybe it was because they were a little worried about reader confusion. They had initially suggested a couple of other readers, and I just didn't feel like they did as good of a job with the different accents. And there are going to be a number of different accents in this book because some of the characters that are picked up are from Eastern Europe. Some scenes are going to be set actually in Europe later in the book. And I have been generally very happy with the way Kate handled accents. And there's also, and some male readers do this too, but there's a tendency among some narrators to, when they shift to the other gender, to just, like take all the emotion out of it, and that's all they do, and that's and I've always felt like, I mean, Kate Rudd's men sometimes, do they sound like a woman doing a man's voice? Yes, but that's always going to be the case. But they actually have some emotion in there, and I really didn't want a narrator where I felt like the emotion got stripped out, because I've got a number of male characters in there, and I felt like we would lose a lot of the impact. That's the main thing for me, is Kate Rudd brings a lot of heart to her narration, and that's what I was looking for this.
Okay. Well, we do have a couple of questions now from Facebook.
Cool.
Marcy would like to know, how long did it take you to write the Delphi effect?
Okay, that's a complicated question, because it was gelling in the back of my head for about 3-4 years. But I am very much one of those people who is deadline driven. So a lot of the Delphi effect was written in a period of about 3 months, and I would say the last quarter of it was probably written in the last month before my deadline, because I hit a little patch of writer's block. And so my kids knew. I freaked out, kind of, and it was like, nope, I'll be in the attic, I'll be writing, everybody stay away from me. Order takeout, just but I made it through that patch. And a lot of times when I hit writer's block like that, I know what it is. It's just a matter of making myself go back and rip out the things that I shouldn't have put in there. I wasn't listening to the characters, and I was trying to make the narrative go where I wanted it to. And at a certain point, the characters will go on strike, and they will tell me, fine, you're not listening to us, we're not talking. And when that happens, I have to go back and just rip out the stuff that doesn't work, and get the whole train back on track. But I started it, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, when just after I finished Timebound, before I ever wrote Time's Edge. But then I had to kind of shelf it until Time's Divide was done, and was very happy to get back into it once I cleared time travel out of my brain.
Okay. And Matthew has a few questions.
Okay.
How did the writing process differ from the Chrono series?
There's less research. Well, there's less historical research in this one. I've had to do a little more on conspiracy theory sites, so less hard research, you might say, for this series than there was for Chronos. In some ways, this series is easier to write because it lacks the time travel element, and you don't have to worry about what changes if someone goes back in time and how it might impact them to cross their own timeline. So there's a lot of things that that are simpler, but I also have a character who at various points in time has several different people in her head. And that is a challenge to write. It's a challenge not just to write in a narrative sense, but also in the sense of fonts to show what's going on. And through my conversations with Kate Rudd this week, in the sense of how that is communicated to a listener as well on an audiobook. So there have been different challenges that I didn't exactly expect, but it's been, because I hear these voices as very distinct in my head. I mean, I know that Jaden sounds different from Anna. I know that he sounds different from Daniel. So it's a no-brainer for me, but that's a little harder sometimes to get across to the reader, depending on the format. And it's different challenges for different formats.
Right. Okay. So kind of based off of that, what you were just saying about fonts, when you, for your first version, did anyone at the Amazon say, oh, the Kindle can't handle that many different fonts? Or?
Yes, we did have that discussion. It wasn't that the Kindle couldn't handle the different fonts. It was that Kindle users can go in and say, boom, I want this font. And if a Kindle user goes in and says, I want my chosen font to overwrite the author's chosen font, then you've got an issue. So we had to look at different ways of indenting and separating because you don't want to just constantly say, Jaden thought inside my head. I mean, it sounds dumb. So I needed to have, but we don't have, I have a font that is for Anna inside her head, and there is a font for someone else inside her head. And I, on my own, decided to limit it to that because I didn't want one for Molly and one for, Jaden and one for whoever. But I try to make it clear through dialogue. I mean, because people talk differently and these characters sound different in my head, and I try to make sure that comes across in dialogue so that the reader isn't confused as to who is having this little internal conversation with Anna.
Okay. Is there like an author's note in the beginning of the Kindle versions as suggesting you may want to turn off?
There's not. And I thought about requesting that, but I don't want to demand that of readers because I mean, some readers have eyesight issues that could make one font more palatable to, although eyesight and palatable doesn't really work, but a little easier on them. It might make their, it more difficult for them to read if they switch. And it isn't confusing the way they have it now. It just meant that we had to go back and occasionally make sure that it wasn't going to be confusing. So it required a little more due diligence on our part as we were going through the proofreading and final stages of copy editing.
Okay.
I'm glad I have a whole troop of proofreaders and copy editors because that way there were a number of people who looked at it in addition to my beta readers, which I have a number of those who had seen it. And that helps because that way I know that a number of sets of eyes have looked over it. And if that many people didn't get confused, I feel pretty confident. My readers have to be pretty smart because otherwise they wouldn't have followed the time travel.
Right. Matthew also asked if you experienced any travel style headaches this time around.
No, it was more multiple personality headaches. And this one is darker in some ways because Anna's picking up ghosts for one thing. So first off, they're dead. And in the case of the first ghost that we meet, she died a rather traumatic death. And that's why Anna gets drawn into this whole thing, trying to help solve her murder, but more importantly, to keep others from being killed. And so there are a lot of nightmares that Anna is dealing with. And as somebody who has perpetual insomnia and occasional nightmares as well, I can sympathize with her. And there were a few times where Molly and Anna's nightmares kind of got into my sleep. So.
All right. So with the way that she's dealing with ghosts, for people who haven't read it, is it kind of like the old TV series Ghost Whisperer, or?
I did not watch that one, so I don't know.
Okay.
It's a situation where, and in from the title, I'm guessing that's a possibility. It's a situation where in Israeli mythology, I know, are within the religion, they talk about Dybbuk's, and I'm trying to remember the other name. I use it in the book, but there's a less wicked form. The Dybbuk is the one who takes over your body and makes you do something you might not want to do. And then there's another form that it's more simply asking for your help. Ibbur, that's it, Ibbur, asking for your help in completing something that you didn't get to finish. So the notion is that these individuals had some task that they felt was unfinished and it's holding them here. And usually it's something minor. There's one I'll mention that one 80-year-old woman died without finishing her New York Times crossword puzzle. So it's one of those situations where it took her, it took an 8-year-old child a very long time to find the right crossword puzzle. But when they found it, Emily was finally able to leave. So those are the kinds of, unfinished tasks that she gets stuck with. But in this case, it's something a little darker, and
Right.
it pulls her into what is essentially a conspiracy, and she ends up getting some clues as to why she has this ability, and teaming up with a number of other individuals who would like to stop it from being abused.
Okay. Yeah. Ghost Whisperer, its basic thing was people would visit the main character who had already passed, and she had to help them do whatever it was that was preventing them from crossing over. And
So
sometimes it
in that
was
sense,
just
yes.
delivering. Yeah, sometimes it was just delivering a message, or other times it was like helping them find, make sure their actual murderer got put into jail, or varied. When you're under one issue I always have with when I'm writing, especially since I'm what seems to be called being a pantser these days. Um, One issue I always have is I start writing, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh look, another new idea. Do you ever suffer from that? And if so, how do
Generally,
you
no.
block it?
Yeah, generally, no. Generally, once I'm locked on, I'm fairly well locked on. Sometimes getting locked on can be difficult. Like I mentioned, I'd been in the Chronos universe so long, and Simon was stuck in my head and he didn't want to get out. And so I kind of had to clear that. I've got a character in Delphi who, that part of my personality, I think, filtered over to her because she draws stuff and she had to get one out of her head before she could move on to the next one. And that's very much how I felt when I was trying to get back into Delphi. And it also made it difficult because the comic book came up around the same time, and so I ended up going back into Chronos to write that. And then I had a couple of commitments to write short stories as well that were still set within Chronos. So it seemed like every time I would get my, you know, brain into Delphi, I'd be going back over into Chronos. And finally, the Delphi characters just said, nope, no more of that. And also the deadline hanging over my head made it pretty clear that I was going to have to, close that off and get back into Delphi. But now it's very difficult for me to get my brain back into Chronos mode right now. So
Okay. One thing I had thought would have been kind of interesting is, uh, of course, if we have you going back to Chronos, um, do like the original history of the main character.
of Catherine,
Um, yeah,
the
brains.
grandmother.
The granddaughter. Like had things progressed without time having to be sped
Oh,
up because of.
yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting. And there are a number of different things that I look back and that's one thing. One reason I'm glad that Kindle Worlds is there is because there are lots of different things that could still be written within the Chronos universe, and there are some people that are working on a number of those. I've got somebody who has been looking at writing one that deals with women's suffrage and a number of other things. At some point, it's very likely that I will go back and write an origins series. I'm still I have several different ideas that I want to touch on with that, but for now I'm not even going to let my brain go there because it needs to stay in Delphi for the next year and a half at least.
Okay. Let's see. Got another question from Facebook. Andrew would like to know, have you noticed any benefits or downsides for writing specifically for the YA audiences?
Um, the reality is I don't even think about whether I'm writing for YA anymore, except if I'm inclined to drop an F-bomb, I might find a way to work around that. I may not be able to avoid it entirely in the series, but really language and, graphic sexual scenes are really the only thing that I think about in terms of that I'm writing for YA, because most of my readers are not young adults. I went into this thinking I was writing for teens, and I have discovered gradually that I would say my average reader is around 35 years old, has 2 kids, a job, and reads the book on Kindle and then listens to it in the car when they're dropping the kids off at school or whatever. It's not a typical YA audience, and I think that's partly because of the Amazon's marketing. I think they may have a tougher time reaching teens. This series may overcome that, though, because, like I mentioned, it is going to be included in the Junior Library Guild selection, so it's going to land in more high schools. But I haven't really seen it as being a limitation. I read a lot of YA books, and I generally don't even think about whether I'm writing specifically for teenagers. It's just that my character is a teen, and that's what makes it a YA series. Not the themes, not the audience, the fact that my character is a teen. So,
Okay. Do you think some of that would be based on the Harry Potter effect?
um, a lot of it for me, I mean, I'm very character driven, and I think the most important decisions we tend to make in life happen during that period when we are teenagers. We are making decisions that are going to influence the way our life happens. It's a very volatile period. And that is one reason that I tend to write YA characters. But it's, these characters, I don't think these characters could not be teens. They are teens. It's just the way they popped into my head. Does that mean that's, the next series I write will necessarily be YA? I don't know. I have an idea for a series that more likely will be dealing with people who are around college age, that I may turn to next if I don't decide to do the Chronos Origin series next. So I may not continue within YA, but I haven't seen it as being limiting in any sense, because most fantasy and sci-fi readers aren't the New York Times snobs who say, "Oh my God, why are you reading YA?" They are ones who are a little more open-minded in that regard, probably because they've heard the same thing about fantasy and sci-fi, which is, adults shouldn't still be reading that stuff. So they tend to be a little more open-minded, and they will, they'll go slumming and read a YA book. So.
Okay. Yeah, well, I was also thinking like Harry Potter seemed to like break a lot of the, oh, you must be this age to appreciate the book. So
I think that it did to some extent, but there were other series that I mean, a lot of adults read A Wrinkle in Time. That's one example. Going back even further, the Heinlein quote unquote juvenile novels that he wrote in the 1950s and 60s, those were read by adults as much as they were read by kids. So I think that we may think of it as being more directly attributable to Harry Potter, but I think there's always been some of that, even going further back.
okay. Um, okay. Let's see. All right. Well, just got a brand new question.
Okay.
Samuel says, "What if I'm?" He doesn't know if he's too late or not, but he would like to request a review copy for review purposes. Should he contact someone at Skyscape or?
If he's left a message in the Facebook thing, I will get with him.
Okay. Yep, he did.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, and So at this point, I know a lot of, well, at least last time I looked, I haven't, which hasn't been all that lately, but your webpage had been largely set up for the Chronos books. Is it about to do a major change?
No, I'll be shifting covers and stuff. I mean, I'll be honest, I change my website infrequently, mostly because I made the mistake of getting somebody else to do my WordPress shift over a while back. And it's very difficult to change the front page of my WordPress. So I have to go in and I have to do like 3 different things. And I've had a number of issues with WordPress. I hate WordPress. Eventually I'm going to go in and just hard code my site again, do it myself, and post it the way I want. But basically, I'll be going in and I'll be adding the cover and stuff. The color schemes and things like that are very similar between the series. So it's just a matter of changing covers, and it will continue to be largely Chronos for a while, though, because I mean I've got a lot of other Chronos works that are out there, and there are more still, coming in terms of comic books and the Kindle in Motion and things like that. So yeah, it'll be a hybrid.
Okay. Um,
And most stuff will still be announced almost exclusively on my Facebook page first. It'll be on Twitter, it'll be on Facebook, and eventually I get it on my website.
okay. Yeah. Well, that'll be nice for people like me to know, because I still refer back to your history of Chronos for stories I'm writing.
Well, all that stuff will still be there. It will remain.
Even though now it seems like you have to know the link in order to be able to find it.
No, it's there. It's you have to go through the. It's not linked from the front page, but it's still there under books and under Kindle Worlds.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. If you do having if you are late to the show, we've been bouncing between 2 and 3 viewers.
We had technical difficulties at the beginning. Yes.
But if you do have any questions for Rysa, do definitely put it on one of the postings so that I can get it and ask her. And um, so that way we can.
It's being 2 to 3, so hopefully if they've got any more questions, they'll get them in here fairly quickly. So I don't have to run off anywhere quite yet, but I've be somewhere at 4. So
Okay. Picking kids up from soccer or something?
no, the kids are actually home, but I've got
Okay.
one at 4 that I've got to get to, but not too far away from here, fortunately. So still got plenty of time.
Okay. Well, that's amazing. They must be quite a bit older than pictures you have up online, because it'd be hard to imagine
They
kids
don't
being.
take pictures anymore. They're 13 and 15 now. So
Oh, okay.
so yeah, there's some of them when they're younger, and very few of them more recent. Mostly because they're like, "Mom, don't take my pictures." Once they reach the teenage stage, but yeah, they're both out of school right now. We're finally on a normal school schedule, so.
Okay. So at this point, if you had to compare the two, would you have has there ever been any thought of going back to taking up your teaching career, or
Oh no.
are you happy that you made the switch?
Very happy I made the switch. Absolutely no comparison. No comparison financially, no comparison in terms of my job satisfaction, so to speak. And I would still be writing anyway, and I just wouldn't be getting paid as much for it. And also, that door is kind of closed anyway, because position that I had at University of Maryland, University College, that's kind of disappeared. There was a little niche there where they were doing full-time positions, and I think they basically shifted over to more part-time professors now. There's a huge shift toward that in academia, and I don't want to get on that train again. So
Okay.
I miss teaching sometimes, but I get to do that occasionally. The political scientist in me will get riled up about the elections, and I'll occasionally be online doing a rant telling people, no, that's not the way the Constitution works. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a lot of interesting postings about how little it seems Trump knows at times.
yeah, you probably don't want to get me started on that one because he does not understand how government works, and sadly, it's depressing when misinformation gets out there. I mean, for instance, about the Second Amendment, the president doesn't alter the Second Amendment. Can interpretations be altered by Supreme Court appointees? Yes, but in order to get rid, quote unquote, of the Second Amendment, you need 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the state legislatures. And could you imagine that in the United States, 3/4 of the state legislatures saying, no, we're not going to have a Second Amendment? Not happening. Not happening in my lifetime. Probably not in my kids' lifetimes. So it's fear talk. And when candidates start that, it's not a good thing, because people don't understand their own system of government quite often, and they fall prey to it.
Yep. Unless, of course, he decides he wants to become like Palpatine and do away with the Congress. And
I'm hoping he never gets that option. So.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it would be a fun option.
No, but we've basically taken reality TV to the next step, is what it seems like with this election, and I think that's kind of a sad statement on our political system, that people don't take it seriously. So, but that's the professor, not the writer, talking. And
Of course, it's also interesting that the person who I think it was Jefferson who insisted on the Bill of Rights. I've heard that he also was of the opinion the government should be totally uprooted every 10 years or so because so it didn't get too powerful.
No, Jefferson quite often spoke flippantly, but his comment was that there, a little bit of revolution basically was good for the system, and he definitely felt like there should be renewal within the system, that you needed an avenue for change. And in that sense, I would argue he was very progressive. I mean, that was the same thing. He owned slaves, but he opposed slavery. He wanted to get a system that did not have slaves, but it needed to be done gradually, he felt, because otherwise you were turning loose. And in Virginia, he couldn't even do it. The laws didn't allow him to just let his slaves free unless they had a job, unless he could show that they were actually self-supporting. So, I mean, he was looking for ways to get around the system. But it had to be a gradual thing, and I think he knew that. And revolution is probably, people have talked about it as there being a revolution, is what he was proposing, and that wasn't really the case. He was more talking about renewal and getting changes done without becoming stagnant. And now we've got people wanting to go back instead of going forward, and that's
right. Okay. And then he probably, so it does sound like he probably would have been in favor of term limits for Congress.
Probably. It's hard to say, but I would say probably, yeah. I mean, certainly, I think going into the government, Washington definitely felt that way, because they were basically telling him he could be president for life. He's like, no, I don't want to do that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jefferson had the same thing, but I don't know that he said anything specifically on that topic.
Okay. And I did also want to thank you for throughout this past year of answering all of my weird little history questions for
That's fine. Like I
I
said,
at least attempt to write.
I'm still interested in history, and I still pull it into my and that's one thing that I like about working with Kindle Worlds is quite often people will come not just with a question about could the time travel part work, but is this history correct? And we are in an era where there's a lot of bogus stuff on the internet. So if you don't know where to look, sometimes you can end up with the wrong information. So I'm always happy to answer history questions within reason. So don't want to have everybody writing history papers say, oh, there.
Right. Yep. That is definitely true. Yeah, and it's especially interesting when you look at like how things have changed, like even just from like since I've started writing a Titanic story, like from the Titanic till now. When I was asking you how old could a boy be while still being considered a child?
Yeah. And, it really would have depended. I mean, if he was traveling with his parents and he was wealthy, they might have considered him a child when he was 18. Probably not. But definitely for somebody who was not of the upper class, if he was not around 12, 13 years old, he would not have been considered, part of the women and children first. And the whole women and children first thing was kind of a myth anyway. There were plenty of people getting onto those lifeboats who probably didn't fit those categories very effectively.
Yeah. And it didn't help that lifeboats were being sent off empty.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, we don't want second-class citizens on here. Or so the movie says anyways.
Yes. I think, well, they did do a lot of research for the movie. And there's actually a boat sinking in my comic series. It's not the Titanic, but the Lusitania plays a bit of a role in the second of the comic books. So I've recently been looking at the lifeboats and all of that from that period, which was around at the beginning of World War One. So.
Okay. All right. Well, it is. We've been going. I don't know. I can't tell for sure.
A little over an hour now, almost.
Yep.
We were about 20 minutes late getting started, but if anybody has any additional questions since we were late getting started and all of that, you can post on my Facebook page. Post a question there, and I will look at those, tomorrow, and pick 3 at random, and we'll go with that. So, because I know some people may have tried to get in and couldn't get in, and maybe had to go back to work or something. And also, it's middle of the day Monday, and I hate to basically go against those who had to work.
Right. Yeah, I almost thought of asking you if you wanted to do it yesterday, but I figured, well, it's Sunday, you're probably out doing things with your family, so.
I was writing yesterday. I actually got a lot written yesterday, so I probably would have told you no, because for once I was actually getting something written. So.
All right, and for people who don't know where your website is, since we did mention it earlier.
Rysa.com, RYSA.com. It's easy to find.
Okay.
And like I said, it's updated, but probably not quite as often as my Facebook page. And so you can find usually new publications and stuff like that will be on my Facebook page. And I'll eventually get them over to the website when I find an hour to wrestle with it.
Alrighty. Well, it was definitely nice chatting with you again.
Yes, nice chatting with you too, Chris, and thanks for having me. And sorry about the technical difficulties. Don't know what was going on there, but I'm glad we finally got it ironed out.
Yep, yeah, it certainly is good. All right, well, hopefully I can have you on again without having to wait a year, but we'll see how that goes.
Okay, well, that would be cool. Take care.
All right, thank you. You too.